The courthouse stood tall at the edge of the busy block, its marble pillars curving toward the roof, and its walls etched with symbols of justice that held a promise of fairness to all who entered. Inside the main chamber, rows of wooden benches glowed under golden lights while visitors shuffled quietly, whispering among themselves with curious glances at the judges and lawyers gathered at the front. Judge Thompson sat at his oak bench, his dark robe draping over carved panels as his stern gaze scanned the room through half-lowered lids, hinting at decades of weighty decisions and late hours. His gavel rested beside him like a silent sentinel, ready to strike order at the slightest sign of chaos or disrespect, and the heavy folds of his robe stirred softly whenever he shifted in his seat. Just below the bench, the bailiff stood in crisp uniform, his brass badge reflecting the light as he watched each person enter and ensured that strict order reigned without interruption. At the center of the polished floor, a single stand rose under the chandelier, and behind it stood Mr. Santos Ramirez, a calm Latino man in a tailored dark suit with neat hair and steady eyes. Ramirez held a slim briefcase in one hand and a stack of crisp papers in the other, his posture straight and confident as he prepared to present his case with clear respect for the law. The room fell silent as Ramirez spoke in a clear voice that carried easily to every corner of the chamber, his words measured and deliberate as he recounted the details of a long-disputed land agreement. His opening sentences described the history of a field once owned by a family of farmers, painting dusty trails and weathered fences with simple language that brought old scenes vividly to life. Spectators leaned forward on benches, drawn by the way Ramirez's clear words created images of creaking gates, stubborn soil, and the labor of hands buried in rich earth. Ramirez paused, fixed his gaze on the judge, and then spoke of the key legal phrase tucked between lines of fine print in the aged document that had caused years of conflict. He explained how a single word about boundaries could move a fence line and shift ownership from one family to another, causing confusion and contention for half a decade. At that moment, Judge Thompson leaned forward, his eyebrows lifting as he regarded the careful precision with which Ramirez explained complex ideas in simple terms. A soft chuckle escaped the judge's lips before he could stop it, and the sound carried through the chamber like a gentle bell announcing unexpected delight. The judge's chuckle turned into a clear laugh that echoed off the walls, surprising the audience unaccustomed to seeing stern faces share moments of genuine amusement. Spectators exchanged startled looks as they heard the judge laugh at the Latino man standing respectfully before him, their gasps fluttering in the hush that followed. Ramirez paused and let the laughter fill the room without showing any sign of offense, his calm features remaining steady as he waited for the judge's next words. Judge Thompson wiped a corner of his eye and tapped his gavel lightly against the bench, restoring silence before he spoke with sincere curiosity. "Mr. Ramirez," the judge said, voice warm, "your description of that clause was so vivid and precise that I could not help but laugh at the elegance of your words. Please go on." Ramirez offered a respectful bow and raised his papers, his voice steady as he moved on to discuss the earliest drafts of the contract and the signatures that bound two families in an old promise. He spoke of bygone days when farmers sold land under setting suns, of ink that bled onto parchment, and of the crisp snap of a seal that held solemn promises. His words flowed calmly, each detail shining under the bright lights and showing how a slight change in wording could alter the entire meaning of an agreement. The judge listened with growing interest, folding his hands across his chest and narrowing his gaze not in doubt but in eager focus on Ramirez's careful explanations. Ramirez shifted to images of ink on paper, explaining how a clerk's hurried script could stray into a date, altering numbers and changing the year from 1 to 7. He used simple examples so that even a newcomer could follow his logic without stumbling over legal terms hidden in careful phrases. Parents sat beside children who nodded slightly at his clear language, and reporters scribbled notes to capture each exact phrase for the stories they would write. Ramirez closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them with renewed energy as he introduced the pivotal error that gave extra power to one clause over another. He traced a line on the page where a clerk's slight flourish made the date read differently than intended, creating a twist only a close reader could detect. That twist, he argued, gave his client the right to reclaim half the land in question, and he illustrated it on white paper drawings laid flat like islands of clarity. With a gentle finger, he traced corrected boundary lines and showed side by side how the old and new maps changed the fate of the disputed property. Judge Thompson bent forward again and asked calmly how the clerk's hand might have slipped when writing such a crucial date in a sealed document. Ramirez explained that ink might have dried unevenly, and the clerk had likely worked by lantern light, making small slips in a line that carried great weight. He spoke of the importance of precision in law as if describing a simple tool, showing how each word carried power that could help or harm those who relied on it. Ramirez praised both families for their care and asked the court to honor their trust by restoring the record to reflect the true meaning behind each clause. The judge nodded slowly and tapped his gavel once more, signaling he was ready for Ramirez's final summary of how justice could be served in this case. Ramirez looked up with a humble smile and said that the rule of law was only as strong as those who read its pages with honest eyes and honest hearts. His words settled over the room like calm water in a deep pool, stirring hope that a fair decision would bring peace to the families who longed for closure. Judge Thompson closed his eyes briefly, then opened them wide and leaned forward, prepared to deliver his verdict after hearing such a clear and fair explanation. Ramirez placed both hands gently on the stand, his papers folded neatly beneath them, and his respectful silence inviting the judge's final words. In that perfect moment of hush, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting to hear how a laugh bore of respect would guide the scales of justice toward fairness for all. Judge Thompson inhaled deeply and spoke with clear authority, declaring that he ruled in favor of Ramirez's client because the corrected date and revised boundary lines resolved the dispute fairly. A gentle murmur rippled through the courtroom as attendees absorbed the news that the land would return to the family whose ancestors had tended it for decades. Ramirez inclined his head in respectful acknowledgement, his posture relaxing for the first time since he stepped before the bench with arguments in hand. The bailiff exhaled softly while standing at attention beside Ramirez, and reporters adjusted their cameras to capture the moment when tension gave way to relief. Judge Thompson leaned forward again, his gaze steady as he explained that legal precision demands careful attention to every term written in a sealed document. He commended Ramirez's ability to translate complex clauses into plain language so that all present could understand the true meaning of the contract. Ramirez offered a simple thank you and suggested that the official records be amended immediately to reflect the corrected date in the chain of title. The judge nodded and instructed the court clerk to update the transcripts and document logs, ensuring that the rightful owners would receive clear titles. Two families who had watched anxiously stood and met the center aisle, where they exchanged polite bows before greeting each other warmly. Ramirez walked down from the stand, his papers tucked neatly under one arm, and approached the families to facilitate the exchange of handshakes. One landowner, an elderly farmer with calloused hands, grasped Ramirez's hand firmly and whispered his gratitude for restoring honor to the property record. The opposing party's representative offered a nod of respect and assured Ramirez that the gesture of sharing legal costs would help mend old wounds. Ramirez agreed, explaining that dividing the attorney fees equally would honor both families' contributions to community harmony. Judge Thompson approved the proposal and tapped his gavel to formalize the agreement, bringing the courtroom back to order with decisive authority. Children in the gallery leaned forward to watch neighbors step beyond conflict and recommit to mutual respect under the rule of law. Reporters scribbled notes and exchanged quiet words, eager to convey Ramirez's thoughtful approach as a lasting example of legal integrity. Outside the courthouse doors, sunlight gleamed on polished marble steps as a soft breeze carried the sounds of congratulatory voices. Ramirez descended the steps slowly, taking in each handshake, each nod, and each word of sincere appreciation offered by neighbors and strangers. A group of farmers gathered around him, their faces weathered by sun and toil, yet brightened by relief and gratitude for his clear guidance. Ramirez assured them that the justice system works best when individuals read every line carefully and defend truth with honesty. Nearby, the court clerk sorted through amended paperwork, his pen gliding over pages to correct the date and record the revised boundary map. Ramirez paused at the courthouse entrance and looked back at the bench where Judge Thompson observed the scene with a satisfied expression. The judge rose from his seat and offered a nod in Ramirez's direction, signaling mutual respect between jurist and advocate. Reporters approached Ramirez on the courthouse plaza, microphones extended as they asked about the judge's surprising laughter earlier that morning. Ramirez smiled and explained that humor can signal genuine appreciation when two minds engage with clarity and respect within legal arguments. He emphasized that explaining complicated rules in everyday language is essential to help communities understand their rights and responsibilities. Journalists nodded in approval and thanked him for illustrating how kindness and knowledge can blend to achieve just outcomes. Ramirez retrieved his briefcase from a car parked nearby and prepared to depart, his mind already mapping out strategies for future cases. Judge Thompson returned to his chambers and sat at his desk, where he reopened an ancient volume to reflect on Ramirez's persuasive logic. He scribbled notes in the margin of his journal, planning to invite Ramirez to speak at a judicial seminar on accessible legal writing. Meanwhile, the court clerk climbed a small ladder to shelve the newly amended documents, ensuring they would be available for public inspection. In the long corridor outside, echoes of closing cell doors and echoing footsteps marked the end of another day of service. Ramirez drove through tree-lined streets, the hum of the engine accompanying his thoughts on the power of clear speech. He felt satisfaction knowing that simple words had untangled a knot of conflict and restored peace between neighbors. Arriving home, Ramirez placed his briefcase on a wooden table and washed his hands at the kitchen sink, thinking of the children he saw in court. His daughter appeared at the doorway and asked if she had witnessed her father's greatest moment in a real courtroom. Ramirez knelt to her height and told her that bravery often comes from speaking clearly and kindly, especially when defending truth. His wife emerged with a warm cup of tea, wrapping her arms around him and sharing in his quiet pride in the day's work. Ramirez sank into an armchair by the window and gazed at the fading twilight, feeling content that justice had been served. As night fell, the lights in his home glowed warmly, and Ramirez drifted off to sleep with dreams of more moments where words could bring justice and hope, with calm warmth that lit every heart. Early the next morning, Ramirez awoke to the soft ring of his phone by the bedside in his modest bedroom, where pale dawn light filtered through thin curtains and news crews already waited for his first words. He dressed carefully in a simple navy suit, straightened his tie in the mirror, and walked through the quiet hall of his home, mindful that today his voice would reach many hearts. In the kitchen, he poured steaming coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and thought about how one careful question in court had revealed the truth hidden in old ink. His daughter peered from the doorway, her eyes filled with curiosity, so he smiled and said that courage often begins with clear words and honest questions. Outside, a local TV reporter set up a tripod at the end of the driveway, the camera's red light blinking as it captured moments of morning calm in a small law office neighborhood. Ramirez invited the reporter inside and explained how a misplaced flourish on an aged document had shifted boundary lines and changed generations of ownership. He spread the original land record across his desk and traced the faded ink with a gentle finger, showing how one tiny curve in a number had altered the fate of a family. The reporter scribbled notes and asked him to describe in plain terms why legal language must be taught clearly to everyone, not just lawyers. Ramirez leaned forward and said that law only works when people can understand the words written on paper without needing secret codes or hidden meanings. He illustrated the error on a fresh sheet of paper, drawing bright boundary lines with a colored pen so viewers could see the difference at a single glance. After the interview, he smiled politely as the crew packed up their gear, then loaded his briefcase into a rented car bound for the law office downtown. At the office, colleagues greeted him with warm congratulations and asked whether he would share the story at the upcoming Bar Association meeting. Ramirez nodded and promised to prepare slides that compare the old and corrected contracts side by side for the seminar's educational session. He spent the afternoon creating clear diagrams and simple bullet points, knowing that visual aids help audiences of any age follow complex ideas with ease. At 4 o'clock, an official letter arrived from Judge Thompson's chambers inviting Ramirez to speak at a judicial seminar on accessible legal writing next month. He accepted the honor with gratitude and paused to reflect on how respect and humor in court had opened doors to broader teaching opportunities. Moments later, an email pinged from a nearby elementary school asking him to visit and read his case story to students as part of a civics lesson. Ramirez replied that he would be delighted and promised to bring copies of the amended contract for children to examine with their own eyes. As evening settled, he walked home beneath streetlights that glowed like friendly lanterns, replaying in his mind each step he had taken to uncover the truth. His wife awaited him on the porch and listened as he described how laughter in the courtroom had become a sign of shared respect and honest exchange. They drank tea by candlelight and discussed how law can be both firm and kind when guided by people who speak plainly and listen deeply. That night, Ramirez opened his laptop and drafted an article for a legal magazine titled Clarity, Laughter, and Justice, a Case Study in Plain Words. He wrote about the importance of reading every line carefully and encouraged readers to ask simple questions until they understood each term fully. After several hours of writing, he saved his draft and set it aside to review in the morning with fresh eyes unclouded by fatigue. Before bed, he placed a final prayer for wisdom on his bedside table, asking for guidance so his future work could help ordinary people protect their rights. Outside, a cool breeze teased the curtains as if nodding in agreement that clear knowledge brings calm to troubled minds. In the quiet dark, he thought of Judge Thompson's kind smile and realized that respect often grows when two minds meet in honest dialogue. He drifted into sleep imagining courtrooms filled with cheerful curiosity rather than tense formality, where questions and answers felt like friendly conversations. In dreams, he guided students through a giant scroll of parchment, highlighting the ink mistake and showing how truth shines when we look closely. He saw judges and advocates laughing together at clever insights, celebrating the moment when simple clarity broke through confusion. He dreamed of communities where land disputes ended quickly because neighbors learned to read and ask until every word was clear. Birds began to sing at dawn and woke him gently, reminding him that each new day offers chances to teach others the power of honest words. After breakfast, he loaded his briefcase into his car and drove toward the elementary school where eager faces awaited the story of law and laughter. The morning air smelled of spring blossoms as he navigated tree-lined streets, leading to a bright brick building buzzing with children's footsteps. When he arrived, the students gathered in the auditorium, their eyes wide with curiosity and notebooks open in readiness. Ramirez greeted them warmly and began by asking what a contract meant, encouraging each child to share ideas in simple, honest language. He showed the old document and guided them to spot the date error, praising every correct identification with a nod of respect. Children leaned forward, pointing excitedly at faded ink lines as he explained how a small slip of a pen can shift history for families. At the end of the visit, they clapped and thanked him, their faces glowing with pride at having uncovered the hidden mistake themselves. As he left the school, Ramirez felt deep satisfaction knowing that clear words and shared laughter had inspired young minds to value truth. That morning, Ramirez arrived at the judicial seminar venue, a grand neoclassical hall in a stone building lined with tall marble columns and bright arched windows that cast soft sunlight across gleaming marble floors echoing each step, which reminded him of the long nights he spent studying cases and dreaming of making a difference. Attendees dressed in black robes and tailored suits filled long rows of polished wooden chairs, their formal shoes clicking on marble tiles as they arranged notepads and legal files in preparation, recalling the anxious faces of families waiting for justice in tense courtrooms. A large banner above the raised stage displayed accessible legal writing in bold letters, shining under rows of crystal chandeliers that glittered like stars from the ornate ceiling, reminding him of the promise he made to simplify law for everyone, even children. Ramirez carried his leather laptop bag slung over one shoulder, a clear folder of meticulously drawn diagrams as he approached the front entrance beneath the carved pediment, holding memories of his own mentor who taught him to value clear speech. Judges and lawyers greeted him with firm handshakes, offering respectful nods and words of appreciation for sharing practical strategies to simplify complex texts and the memory of his late father who believed in fairness for all. The seminar room hummed with low conversation as people found their seats, tapped open briefcases, and adjusted reading glasses in anticipation of his presentation, wishing that every person could follow legal words without confusion. Ramirez set up his laptop on a sturdy wooden podium adorned with the court's gilded seal, its surface smooth from years of formal events and addresses, thinking how this room would hear his ideas echo for years to come. A digital projector flickered to life behind him, projecting a blank white screen framed by heavy burgundy curtains and ready for his slides, feeling the weight of his responsibility to share useful knowledge. He cleared his throat softly, checked the microphone levels, and pressed a button that displayed his title slide in crisp black font on a white background, noticing the rhythm of his heartbeat as he prepared to speak. The audience fell silent, their focused faces turning toward him in anticipation as the glow of the screen reflected in the polished bench lights, aware that this moment could change how courts communicate with the public. Ramirez began by explaining how a single misplaced number in a sealed contract had shifted the boundary of the disputed land and impacted two families for years, imagining the faces of judges who would later teach his methods. He spoke in steady, clear tones, choosing simple words so that judges, attorneys, and even students could easily grasp his narrative without confusion, focusing on every word so his message would land clearly. He clicked to the next slide, which showed a high-resolution scan of the original document in faded ink with the error highlighted by a bright red rectangle, watching each person's reaction as they saw the red highlight. The audience leaned forward as they examined the scanned page, noting the fine boundary lines running along the edges and the tiny misprinted date, seeing curiosity spark in the eyes behind polished glasses. Ramirez paused and invited questions before moving on, encouraging participants to raise hands if any detail needed clarification or more time, welcoming each question as a step toward clearer understanding. A judge in the front row raised a hand and asked how the clerk's slight flourish could have slipped past reviewers in earlier hearings, recalling that simple questions can unlock hidden truths. Ramirez answered that readers often trust sealed court files and may skim text too quickly, missing subtle curves and handwritten digits under dim light, wishing that every clerk would learn to write carefully. He smiled and added that reading documents slowly and asking straightforward questions can help anyone uncover hidden mistakes in official records, smiling at the idea that humor and respect can work together. His next slide displayed a clean, color-coded map with corrected lines marking each property section, each hue chosen for clear contrast and ease of viewing, hoping that his visuals would guide others beyond this room. He explained how visuals like maps and charts can communicate concepts more quickly than lengthy paragraphs filled with legal jargon, noting how simple colors can carry complex messages with ease. Lawyers in the audience nodded and took diligent notes as he outlined methods for creating simple diagrams with basic office tools or free software. Ramirez then shared real-world examples of cases where plain language and clear graphics had led to faster, more just outcomes than complex legal prose. One example described a water rights agreement that paired everyday terms like riverbank, flow limit, and usage fee with a simple flowchart. Each case study slide included bullet points and annotated illustrations designed so any listener could sketch a similar diagram on a blank sheet. Ramirez invited everyone to participate in a hands-on exercise, distributing crisp white sheets of paper, colored pencils, and simple stencils. Participants smiled as they sketched basic shapes and lines to represent sections of text, boundary maps, and flowcharts under his kind guidance. He walked among the rows, reviewing each drawing with genuine curiosity and offering encouraging feedback on clarity and creativity. Judges looked surprised as they realized that a handful of simple lines could reveal the meaning of complex clauses more quickly than verbose sentences. Ramirez noted that legal professionals often default to long, dense language when a few well-chosen words would convey the same meaning more directly. He encouraged everyone to practice writing concise sentences and to test their drafts by reading them aloud to peers or family members. A lawyer seated near the back leaned forward and whispered that he planned to use these techniques when drafting his next contract summary. Ramirez clicked to a slide titled Key Takeaways and listed 3 clear steps: read carefully, ask questions, and use visuals to support text. He spoke passionately about teaching law students accessible writing and hosting community workshops to improve public comprehension. Attendees followed along, nodding and jotting down notes, translating his guidance into actionable plans for their own legal practices. The session concluded with a round of genuine applause as Ramirez thanked the audience for their engagement and earnest curiosity. Judges and attorneys lined the aisle to shake his hand, offering personal thanks for his emphasis on clarity, respect, and inclusivity in law. Outside the seminar hall, late afternoon light streamed through large arched windows, casting bright patterns on the marble floor and high walls. Ramirez packed his laptop into its case and handed out printed copies of his published article to eager attendees who asked for extras. He felt a sense of deep pride knowing his work would shape the way legal writing is taught and practiced in courts and classrooms alike. As he stepped out into the warm breeze, Ramirez glanced back at the grand hall and reflected that simple words and helpful visuals can lead to fairer justice for all. Early the next day, Ramirez found a thick envelope on his desk with the State Bar Association's official seal gleaming in the morning light. He slit the flap and pulled out a formal letter inviting him to lead a workshop on plain legal writing at the annual bar conference. Smiling at the memory of Judge Thompson's appreciative laugh, he gathered his notes and began organizing his ideas. He jotted down 3 clear goals: simplify complex clauses, use everyday language, and include vivid examples. By midday, he had drafted a dozen slides showing side-by-side comparisons of dense paragraphs and simplified summaries. His assistant reviewed each slide to ensure the text was accurate and easy for non-lawyers to follow. That afternoon, Ramirez drove to the downtown convention center, where banners reading "Law I Can Understand" hung from every column. Inside the hall, crowds of lawyers and judges moved between booths, chatting about new rules and technology in law. Ramirez found room C210 and set up his laptop on a small podium beside a screen flickering with his title slide. When the hour arrived, he tapped the microphone and greeted the audience with a warm "Good morning, everyone," before diving into his first example. He pointed to an original clause filled with legal jargon and showed how a few simple words could make the meaning clear. Audience members leaned forward, nodding as they saw complex sentences shrink into briefer, more direct statements. A judge asked how to teach plain writing to law clerks, and Ramirez recommended daily drills breaking down dense paragraphs. He suggested using before and after exercises where students rewrite tricky clauses in plain terms. After the talk, attendees formed a line at the podium to shake his hand and thank him for the practical advice. A dozen judges invited him to visit their local courts and offer similar workshops in smaller towns. He wrote down their names and addresses, planning a tour that would bring his message to rural counties. That evening, Ramirez returned home with a head full of ideas and a box of printed materials from the conference. He sat at his kitchen table, sipping herbal tea as he began drafting letters to each judge who had asked for help. Over the next week, he mailed invitations outlining his plan for free workshops in county seats across the region. One letter arrived at the home of a county clerk named Ms. Davis, who quickly wrote back asking for a session in her town hall. Ramirez booked a trip to Maplewood, a small community surrounded by rolling fields and old barns. On the day of the workshop, he arrived at the town hall just as sunlight fell on dusty floorboards and framed photos of local history. He set up his flip chart and markers and welcomed a group of farmers, teachers, and small-town officials. He explained why clear deeds and simple contracts could prevent disputes and protect families from costly errors. One farmer asked how to check his own land records for mistakes, and Ramirez showed him how to read the date stamps carefully. By the end of the session, attendees had rewritten outdated passages in their deeds into language they could understand at a glance. Ms. Davis thanked him profusely and presented a small wooden plaque engraved with the town seal as a token of gratitude. Before he left, several families asked if he could host a session for their children to teach them about community law. Ramirez agreed and promised to return the following month with copies of his article and simple handouts for kids. As word spread, letters arrived from families in neighboring counties asking for help with their land titles. One letter told of a man who nearly lost his home because he could not read the fine print in a lease agreement. Ramirez replied with detailed instructions and a promise to speak at the county fair in October. Meanwhile, a local radio station invited him for a live interview about his work in plain legal writing. On the morning of the show, he sat in a sound booth with foam walls and a microphone glowing red. The host asked him why he believed simple language could change the law, and he answered that people must understand rules to follow them. He shared a story of a neighbor who saved his family farm by spotting a date error that only a careful reader could see. Callers phoned in with questions about wills, leases, and contracts, and Ramirez answered patiently and clearly. By the end of the hour, dozens of listeners thanked him for making law seem less scary and more fair. Driving home from the station, Ramirez felt a deep sense of purpose, knowing his work would help many people protect their rights. The morning after the radio interview, Ramirez opened his laptop and reviewed messages from listeners who thanked him for making the law easy to understand. He answered dozens of emails with brief tips on reading contracts, wills, and leases. His inbox filled with requests for workshops and simple guides in Spanish and English. Ramirez decided to write a short handbook summarizing his plain writing methods. He titled it Words for Justice and outlined chapters on reading texts, asking questions, and creating clear diagrams. Each chapter began with a simple story and ended with a short exercise. He wrote in clear sentences, avoiding jargon so that a sixth grader could follow. Neighbors dropped by his office to offer illustrations for the book, drawing maps and basic flowcharts. A local artist sketched a scene of Ramirez in court smiling as judges and farmers listened. Ramirez spent nights editing the text until each sentence felt smooth and easy. By the end of the week, he had a draft ready for review by his assistant. His assistant read every page and suggested minor edits to simplify a few sentences. They reviewed the book together over coffee in his kitchen. Over the next month, Ramirez worked with a small publisher to prepare the handbook for printing. He chose a friendly typeface and clear layout so readers could follow without strain. The cover showed a simple scale of justice balanced on a pencil. When printed, the book arrived in modest cardboard boxes at his office. Ramirez organized a small launch event at the county library. Students, farmers, teachers, and neighbors attended the event. He spoke about his journey from courtroom to classrooms. He read the first chapter aloud to the audience. Children counted words and asked questions as he spoke. He guided them to spot complex phrases and rewrite them simply. Farmers and officials practiced drawing diagrams on blank paper. Teachers promised to use his handbook in their classes. A librarian praised the book for its clear instructions. Reporters took photos as he signed copies for readers. A local news segment covered the event, calling him a champion of clear law. Book orders poured in from other towns and cities. Schools asked for copies for their civics classes. Attorneys requested sets for their law firms. Ramirez arranged shipments to nearby counties. He also made a free PDF version available online. Visits to his website doubled as he received messages of thanks. He received an invitation to speak at the state education board. The board wanted his ideas for teaching legal language in schools. Ramirez accepted and prepared a short presentation with simple examples. He hoped to inspire teachers to include plain language in lessons. When he spoke at the board meeting, members applauded his clear approach. That night, as he reviewed his notes, Ramirez felt proud that his words were reaching many people. Several months later, Ramirez received an official invitation from the state education department to present his handbook at a statewide symposium on civic learning and legal literacy, recognizing how his simple methods had empowered communities across the region. In a bright auditorium filled with educators, librarians, and policymakers, he stepped to the podium under soft spotlights, feeling a surge of pride as applause greeted him for translating complex legal ideas into clear, accessible lessons. He began by recounting how a single misprinted date had sparked years of conflict over land boundaries, and how his careful reading and plain language summary had restored fairness for two families. His slides showed before and after comparisons of dense paragraphs transformed into concise bullet points that even a sixth grader could follow, and he explained each change step by step. Teachers nodded eagerly and took meticulous notes, plotting ways to adapt his exercises for classrooms where students often struggled with jargon and fine print. A university professor in the front row raised a hand to ask how his handbook could be integrated into legal studies, and Ramirez suggested pairing it with hands-on workshops and community service projects. A librarian proposed hosting weekly legal reading nights, where residents could bring their own documents and learn to spot errors with guidance from trained volunteers. Ramirez emphasized that empowering people to read and question every line of a contract could prevent costly mistakes and build trust between neighbors. He shared anecdotes of homeowners who recovered thousands of dollars by spotting overlooked clauses and of renters who renegotiated leases after understanding their rights. Audience members smiled as they recognized themselves in his examples. Ordinary people facing confusing paperwork and feeling intimidated by legal language. After his talk, dozens of attendees lined up to shake his hand, thanking him for practical tools they could implement immediately in schools, libraries, and community centers. Several school districts invited him to lead professional development sessions for teachers, and he agreed to travel across the state to train educators in plain language techniques. That afternoon, he received a flurry of emails from participants requesting electronic copies of his slides, sample exercises, and annotated contracts for classroom use. He spent the evening converting his keynote materials into downloadable PDFs and posting them on his website under a free teacher toolkit section. Meanwhile, a local newspaper ran a feature article on the symposium, praising Ramirez for making the law approachable and urging citizens to demand clear communication from legal professionals. A week later, a popular morning television show invited him to demonstrate his methods live, and he agreed, knowing that national exposure could amplify his impact. In a TV studio, he sat beside the host and used a whiteboard to draw simple diagrams illustrating how contract clauses define rights and responsibilities in everyday life. Viewers called in with questions about landlord-tenant agreements, small business contracts, and simple wills, and Ramirez answered each inquiry in straightforward terms anyone could understand. Producers were impressed by his ability to engage audiences with practical examples and genuine warmth, and they invited him to return for a weekly legal literacy segment. That night, he reviewed transcripts of the show and drafted short scripts for future episodes, eager to reach viewers who might never set foot in a courtroom. As spring turned to summer, downloads of his free handbook and related resources tripled, indicating growing demand for plain language legal tools. His website analytics showed hundreds of daily visitors accessing materials in both English and Spanish, prompting him to organize volunteer translation teams for other languages. Ramirez coordinated with community volunteers to review and refine the Spanish edition, ensuring cultural nuance and clarity for native readers. He also enlisted graphic designers to create infographics and animated explainer videos that could simplify concepts like lease renewals and land surveys with visual aids. Shared on social media pages for neighborhood associations and civic groups, these visuals reached thousands of people who otherwise might avoid legal matters. In rural counties, local extension offices began hosting legal literacy labs using his materials, where residents could drop in with questions about documents ranging from mortgages to marriage certificates. Community leaders reported fewer simple disputes and faster resolutions, as people came prepared with clear questions and confident reading skills. Ramirez tracked impact through surveys, noting improvements in resident satisfaction and reductions in costly legal errors in areas using his resources. He reflected on the moment Judge Thompson first laughed in court, recalling how genuine respect and shared understanding can transform formal proceedings. With each new request for workshops, articles, and media appearances, Ramirez saw evidence that clarity and empathy could bridge gaps between legal experts and citizens. He continued updating his handbook with new case studies, exercises, and diagrams based on feedback from teachers, lawyers, and community organizers. His assistant managed communications as invitations poured in from civic groups, nonprofits, and educational institutions across multiple states. Local law firms began offering pro bono support for legal reading nights, pairing attorneys with community members to review personal documents together. Ramirez felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that words he had chosen carefully were helping people protect their homes, businesses, and families. In the evenings, he sat at his desk reading emails from readers who shared success stories of corrected titles and renegotiated agreements that saved them from financial ruin. He smiled at notes from grandparents who taught grandchildren the importance of reading every word and asking questions until they understood fully. As the year drew to a close, Ramirez drafted a summary report for Judge Thompson, thanking him for the initial moment of respect that inspired this journey. He printed the report and delivered it by hand to the courthouse, where the judge welcomed him with a warm handshake and an offer to collaborate on future judicial education events. Walking away from the bench, Ramirez realized how a single laugh born of genuine appreciation had set in motion a movement for legal clarity and community empowerment. That night, as he reflected on his work, Ramirez felt grateful that simple language and honest dialogue could bring justice and hope to so many lives. In the early hours of a quiet morning, Ramirez sat at his oak desk writing the preface to his updated handbook, reflecting on the smiles of families and judges inspired by his clear legal lessons. He thought of the neat lines and aged contracts, and how one small change had taught entire communities to read every word with care and patience. Outside his window, birds sang among blossoms that drifted in a gentle breeze, reminding him of the fresh start each day offers to learn and protect one's rights under bright morning sunlight. Ramirez began writing about his journey from a courtroom moment when a judge's surprised laugh had sparked his mission to make law friendly and fair. He described workshops in rural halls where neighbors gathered at tables with colored pencils and flip charts, tracing maps and phrases until confusion gave way to understanding. Teachers, students, and farmers learned to spot tiny mistakes in dates and wording, saving homes, lands, and livelihoods by asking simple questions and reading closely. He wrote about his visits to schools where children pointed out errors on prepared sheets and beamed proudly when they caught mistakes before their parents had noticed them. He recalled the moment when a young student raised her hand in a classroom and said, "I can fix this sentence," making Ramirez realize how powerful clear words can be. Judges and lawyers in big cities reached out to invite him to speak at their courthouses, eager to learn how plain language can speed up justice and build trust. Ramirez shared anecdotes of court clerks who updated records under his guidance, ensuring documents matched the true intent of families and reduced costly court delays. He reflected on letters received from firefighters, shopkeepers, and postal workers who had used his handbook to read leases, wills, and safety agreements more confidently. Community leaders organized legal reading nights in libraries and community centers, pairing residents with volunteers to read and correct important papers together in welcoming spaces. Ramirez described how local news stories celebrated everyday heroes who found mistakes that saved neighbors from losing land or money to hidden clauses. He wrote that clear writing in law can feel like a gentle light guiding people through dark forests of confusing words and technical terms. His revised handbook included new chapters on reading digital documents and understanding online forms, as more people use websites to sign agreements and manage accounts. Ramirez added tips for using simple diagrams on screen captures, showing that pictures can carry meaning when words alone might leave readers unsure. He included exercises in both English and Spanish, inviting bilingual families to work side by side and learn how translation can reveal hidden details. The book's new design featured larger text, bright icons, and simple headers so users of all ages and reading levels could find guidance without extra help. Ramirez recounted feedback from senior centers where older adults said the plain instructions had given them confidence to review their own medical forms and pension papers. He noted that many hospitals and banks began sharing his guide with patients and customers to reduce errors and ease stress when filling out essential documents. He wrote about partnerships with universities to include his methods in writing courses, training future lawyers to think first about the reader's understanding. In the foreword, Ramirez thanked every person, child, teacher, and judge who had joined him in the quest for clear law and honest dialogue. He paused to add a brief history of legal writing, noting how centuries of complex rules had drifted far from everyday language and often left people confused. He explained that modern law must balance exactness with clarity, so individuals can protect themselves without needing secret codes or insider knowledge. Ramirez described workshops that use role-playing to show how speaking aloud can help readers notice errors and fill missing details. He wrote about a dance between words and images where each could support the other to build a more complete understanding. He reminded readers that patience and kindness go hand in hand with clear writing, as respectful dialogue builds trust between people and institutions. Goals for the new edition included reaching other languages, creating audio versions, and adding video guides that walk viewers through real documents. He acknowledged volunteers who translated chapters into 5 languages, sharing stories of families around the world learning to read legal papers with confidence. Ramirez described how his website now offered free tools to highlight key phrases and generate simple summaries for uploaded documents. He noted that nonprofit groups use these tools to train staff and connect volunteers with community members in need of legal help. In the final chapters, he offered a collection of sample letters readers could send to clerks or lawyers when they found confusing or incorrect text. He included clear templates for asking for corrections politely and effectively, showing that respect can help open doors to better cooperation. Ramirez concluded with a hopeful note that every person who reads one more sentence carefully becomes a guardian of fairness and justice. He signed the preface with gratitude and a promise to keep improving his work, inviting readers to share their own stories of discovery. After finishing the preface, he leaned back in his chair and let a moment of quiet pride settle over him before turning to new pages. He planned to spend the coming months visiting distant communities, teaching legal writing in places without easy access to lawyers and teachers. As he closed his notebook, he felt certain that simple words and honest questions could continue to change lives for many years ahead. Ramirez stood up, stretched, and walked to the window where he watched children playing, knowing that tomorrow they too might stand up in court with clear voices. In that hopeful moment, he read the first sentence of the new chapter aloud and smiled, ready to help the next generation speak truth through every word.